Hey, everybody, welcome to the Entrepreneur Motivation Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Bello, and today I've got Kevin McHugh with me. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here, Chris. You're
Great
so
to be
lucky.
here.
You're so lucky I'm here.
I
I'm the
am
guy,
so
the
lucky.
man. Yeah.
This is the guy I've been trying to get on the show since I started it before I even knew I needed to connect with you.
Yeah.
But we connected recently, and I'll go ahead and give you a chance to introduce yourself in a second. But what I love
Sure.
about when we connected, you said, hey, I wasn't necessarily sure if I should take this meeting, but something was telling me, he's a young guy. I took a look at his website. I like what he's about. Let's take this conversation. And so here we are. You're on my podcast probably about a month later, and I'm really glad to connect with you. So thank you once again, Kevin, for joining
My
me
pleasure.
today. Time.
My pleasure. I'll give you a warning. I've had one or two other podcast interviews, and because of my nature, which is to get to know other people, I have been called twice on, okay, wait a minute, who's interviewing who?
So hey, we could take it any way you want. I love the conversation.
So be prepared. Be prepared, man. Be prepared. The other thing that I would say is that, you gave the reasons why I took the call, but there was one other reason that was really important. As I live at this period of my life, 67 and heading into the final quarter, I'm much more conscious of my spiritual world, and I think of God actually is involved. And now I'm focused as much as I can on listening to what his purpose might be. So when I was getting ready to blow you off, something came up, and might have been more of a spiritual thing than anything else. And it really turned around into, maybe I'm supposed to help this guy. And I find that is the way to go through life. And certainly when I sell what I sell as an executive coach, I genuinely believe I can help people. So you go and help regardless, either way. Absolutely. So that's, and it turned out to be a great decision because I thoroughly enjoyed meeting you.
I enjoyed our conversation. And like you said, I wrote so many notes down and you told me things to look into, and we talked about some psychology stuff. So it was very interesting, but I want to make sure the audience has an idea of a little bit more about your background. Would you like me to kind of read from your website, or do you want to give us the rundown on how you got started, getting results, becoming a CEO at a young age?
Yeah, I'll try and the net is I was terminally unemployable and finally realized at 35 I probably should work for myself. and then I looked at my bank account. There was an insufficient quantity to have equity in any business whatsoever, except consulting, low capital entry.
Yeah.
So I'll do as quick an executive summary as I can.
Sure.
I grew up in the outskirts of Philadelphia, and my dad was a middle-level banker. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. Grew up as the oldest, and I had two sisters, one 2 years younger, one 7 years younger. And my mom and dad both were kids who came as kids out of the Depression, and so they were ambitious for themselves and for me, and work was the bottom line. So my dad threw a snow shovel in my hands when I was about 7 and said, knock on the door and shovel the walk. I think it was about 10 cents. And when you live in a row home, it's pretty cool because, man, you just go a mile and you come back jingling. And then in the summertime, it was, okay, this is a lawnmower.
Yep.
And I don't know if your listeners in the age category that would even know what a lawnmower looked like back then. It was 2 wheels in a series of blades. And you would physically, manually push it, and it would cut the grass. And eventually I graduated to a power mower. That was work. And then, of course, by the time I was 16, I get a part-time job. So there I was at Acme Supermarkets as a cashier. And when you were in that system, if you were really a talented cashier, they would take you off the register and put you in their stocking shelves. That was a mini promotion. And that's what I did. So I was a hustler. Also had a newspaper route actually in between some caddying and lawn cutting, everything. And that meant getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to serve the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I don't know if any parent would do that today. send an 11-year-old at 5 a.m. into
Probably
the snow
not.
with your wire cutters and your bike and your big basket. And so I would say worker, performer, and that's what I've been all my life. So my first real job, if you will, outside of that was in a construction equipment manufacturer, a company called JCB. They made backhoes, and they were coming over from England into the U.S., and I became a district manager. And when you succeed in that world, your territory gets bigger. You start with Connecticut and Massachusetts. The next thing you know, well, we'll give them Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And then we did great with that, so we'll give them New York and New York City and Long Island, and we'll throw in New Jersey.
Jeez.
So I literally, for 3 years, drove with a CB radio, 26 locations. The northernmost was Caribou, Maine. The westernmost was Buffalo, and the southernmost was Atlantic City. And I succeeded in that, and I got another promotion opportunity, and that would have made me the vice president at like 28 of the western United States.
Wow.
And I had moved my wife with a 6 months pregnancy for the first kid. The second kid was born in a Springfield, Massachusetts, and I was always on the road, and I finally said, I declined the promotion. I went with one of my local dealers, and that was a family business. My first experience with a family business, and that was marvelous. It lasted a year in Rochester, New York, and I was a problem child, you see. I kept questioning why
you were taking orders, right?
Why are we doing that? And my bosses at the previous company at JCB warned me. They said, that's not going to work for you. You're still green. And of course, I thought I wasn't.
Right.
And turns out they were right. So that I wore out my welcome there in a year. And the next job was in a office furniture business as a distributor. We were a big steel case dealer. That moved my family again back to Massachusetts. And that was a sales management job. And then I decided I was too big for that. So I was quitting. And then they said, no, we'll make you the VP. And I did that for a while. And then I wanted to quit again. And they made me the president. All of which is a way of saying I was an ambitious, green behind the ears guy and fairly arrogant little schmuck. Schmuck. Yes, that's the extent of my Yiddish, I think. But It's the perfect word. Yeah, and so I stayed there a longer time because I didn't want to be a job hopper. And eventually, in that job, when I became president, that's when I sort of became connected with an outfit called the Young Presidents Organization. And that came back to be a big part of my life. For anybody who doesn't know what that is, YPO is an international, a global organization where if you become the president or CEO of a company of size, there's a limit to the size. It has to be substantial size. Before your 44th birthday, you join this organization, and you join at a chapter level, which is, usually cities. Here in Ohio, where I am now, there's a Cleveland chapter, there's a Columbus chapter, Cincinnati chapter, but there's about 30,000 members around the world right now, probably in about 250 chapters. So when I was there as the president, a couple of my customers suggested I join, and I did. And that's how I got connected with YPO. And then after 6 years, they had enough of me and my challenges and difficulties of wanting to be the king of the world, and I came to Ohio. But that was, the truth be told, that was a pivotal moment because I was crashing and burning. I got all the wrong information from my exposure to the world of YPO. I thought I had arrived. I had six-figure income and a car and a nice company car and a country club and a nice 3,500 square foot house. And the truth is, once I joined YPO, I realized, oh no, that's like the guard shack at the gates of some of
what's possible. Right?
I encountered serious wealth, and it didn't do anything but make me go, well, obviously it's not enough.
You wanted that.
I went the wrong direction. Yeah. If there's a lesson here, that somebody might take away when they're listening. It doesn't matter where you are. Relatively speaking, when you are making X, there's somebody making X plus 50% or 100%, twice as much. And then you go to that number, and then you meet the people in the next number. So even hitting $500 million in net worth, I have encountered clients who say, well, got to get to $1 billion. So
right.
if you get locked in that, man, it never ends. So
it never does. The number always increases. One thing that I heard someone say is it's like you're trying to climb a mountain. And when you get to the top of that mountain, you realize that there's actually a higher mountain that you couldn't see from the first one.
Bingo. Yeah. And so by the time I got here to Ohio, I was coming down the mountain. And this job here lasted 6 months, and I got tipped off that I was being my normal self again, and then, climbing up like a misbehaving pit bull Rottweiler up the owner's, and that's when I decided I got to do my own thing.
Wow. So it sounds like you were
quick history.
Yeah, no, you were very motivated and ambitious from the start. And I guess those early wins gave you the confidence. I know you said you were green behind the ears, but you had the track record to kind of give you that confidence. And so it's really, I think a lot of people in my audience can relate to that feeling of maybe not necessarily having that level of history. I know I've got some younger entrepreneurs in the audience as well. So congrats on all of that. I mean, that's an impressive resume that you built up. But it seems like you always wanted to, provide some more feedback than was welcome at times, and eventually that led you to go off on your own to what you're doing.
And I can tell you now, because of being around long enough, I know what the challenge is. I've done enough work on myself and the work I do with clients. It really came down to being an issue of control. Mm-hmm. And some people are okay without having a lot of it. They're mellow and calm, and they flow and they go. And then there are other people, and I'm in that category. We call them drivers. If you do assessments with a disc orientation, and D is dominance, we're off the charts with dominance, and we got to be in control. And
absolutely.
That's really what it was. It was really, and I can today look at somebody's profile and know the moment I see a dominance score over the 85th percentile that they're in for a rough ride, and unless they get to the right boss who knows what that looks like and gives them lots of room, lots of room to run, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but feeling in control is powerful. And
it really is.
Need to feel it.
No, I mean, and even with entrepreneurs who take control of their schedule, I mean, when we talked, I shared that I was in real estate and I used to work in oil and gas, and I didn't like having a manager telling me what to do. And I would be like, why are we doing this? Why are you telling me to do this? That doesn't make sense. And I would question everything. And sometimes they didn't like that. They wanted you to do what you were told.
No, that's
right. Like, this is what management wants. You do this. I was like, this doesn't make sense. Is this the best way to go? And so I came in overly optimistic, I'm sure, like you did. And it didn't take long for the optimism to be beat out of me, because within 3 years, I was kind of like, well, it's hopeless. What's the point of trying to improve something? People are just going to tell me it's always been this way. And that's when I started kind of looking at, how do I exit this and just create my own destiny where I don't have any red tape to work with?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the folks that I coach today, I can help them understand that if you really want to get better, you should hire people who are asking why.
Absolutely.
Because, they'll drive you to new ideas and innovation and productivity, and, but if you're not secure enough in yourself, you end up receiving all that as a challenge to your authority, a challenge to the status quo, or, so when I'm helping people put together a team, I'm like, and I see one of these folks wired like you, or wired like I was wired, I go, are you really ready? Because I'm going to make a prediction. This person is going to be climbing up your butt and wanting to know why, and they're going to have different ideas. Are you prepared for that?
And are you willing for that combativeness in a way? Because if someone's questioning you and you like to not be questioned, that could be an issue. But like you said, I think it's very valuable to be able to accept that, other people are going to have ideas. They're going to think differently than you. And if you have an open mind, you're able to grow much further than
Right.
if you think you have to be the one who has all the answers.
So I have a question for you about your audience or people who come to want to hear your podcast and your guests. Who are they as best you understand them? Like why are they coming to you? What are they looking for?
So I've gotten a chance to learn a little bit more about who's in my audience lately because I invite people frequently to reach out to me on social media. Mostly on Instagram is my most active platform. And it's pretty incredible to see I've got many self-employed entrepreneurs. Maybe they've kind of created a job for themselves in a way where they're trying to escape into entrepreneurship. They're 20s or maybe early 30s. Some of them a little older, some of them have businesses and whatnot already that have been established for years. But they're trying to find that next thing. They want to take control of their destiny. Sometimes if you have read the E-Myth, they kind of build themselves a bit of a job where they have just created something that was worse than their day job and now they're a slave to it. And so a lot of people who reach out are trying to find that balance of financial freedom and life freedom, lifestyle freedom that we all seek. And I'm kind of in that cycle sometimes as well too. Like, how do I get out of this job and work on growing an actual business, hiring staff and virtual assistants and things like that. So I think we talked about that last time. I've got a lot of younger people in my audience, millennials, and I think people can relate to that because that I just turned 30 this year. And so I feel like I speak in a way that a lot of people can align with, and maybe they're just not sure how to articulate it at times.
Yeah. When I'm talking to 30 somethings, and I think this has been a change in a prior generation, the idea of a job was really quite different. I mean, when my dad had his job, the idea was stay there for 30 years, get a pocket watch. Yeah, that's a real thing, man. Yeah. That's like a real thing, right? And
today it's like we know you can't, nobody's loyal, right?
Yeah, don't even bother thinking of the term employee. You are your own independent contractor, and you are going out to sell yourself. And then if I were you, I would not look for one shred of loyalty from anybody, because business conditions change on a dime, and the people you love who gave you a job might turn around one day and say, well, you know what? We just sold this for 10 times, EBITDA. And you're like, what?
And your role is no longer needed, right? A certain department.
Yeah. If you're part of some roll-up industry, the first thing they want to do is find ways to cut headcount.
Yeah.
So there you are, back on the streets, and now you got to market and sell and the whole bit. So be prepared, look at yourself as an independent contractor, and we might call it a job and you might have an application process, but when you go there, you bring your game, man. And
for sure,
hopefully they pay you fairly and treat you decently. And if they don't, then, you're going to move on.
I love that. I wrote that down. We are all independent contractors because you've got to treat it that way. And people don't understand sometimes, I think, the power of just a presence, a social media presence, having some kind of voice, because that's your marketing platform. I mean, sure, you can have a resume, but in the event that you need a new job or position, how powerful is it if you can show, hey, I've done this and that. Here's my audience. I've got a loyal fan base that if I switch over to your company and they need this product, it's going to be easier to sell to that audience I've created versus having to go out and knock on doors, as the proverbial saying goes, which I guess isn't as common right now in this COVID environment. It's more like knocking on virtual doors, right?
So I can tell you this from the employer's standpoint too. You should think of the people who you hire in that vein. Like if you don't provide an opportunity for them to really blossom and grow and share their gifts and engage and ask why questions, right? They will move on. And, your work environment, your culture, however you put it together, it's got to be a different kind of vibe today for the 30-year-old than it was in the prior generation.
Definitely.
And so make the place entrepreneurial to the best of your abilities, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of places, I mean, I have a contact I know, or a few that have worked at places like Google, where it's almost the other extreme of so many fun things and, a nap pod and ping pong table, where it just seems like, these people are always having fun. When do they do the actual work? But they get so much done because they're in that place of play and freedom and creativity versus the stringency of, the corporate America that maybe, you said your dad grew up in, where you stay there for 30 years, you retire, you get your pension plan, and you're all good to go. Now everyone sees it as, it's cutthroat. Nobody's loyal, employee or employer, because they know how quickly things can change. So you have to make yourself very marketable in the event that something does happen.
By the way, there's a lot of companies that will go through all of the creation of those work environments, and we got free lunches, and we have a spa and a massage, and we have a gym. And I can tell you, that's great. It is not going to keep people there who are talented. Trust me. People stay because they have emotionally bought into a mission and have a feeling that they are absolutely making a difference.
Definitely. I'm writing that down. People buy.
You can only play so much ping pong and have so many pizza parties and dance hours and what have you, but at the core, every single human being is wired for a sense of accomplishment, some recognition, but it's an internal recognition. It's me. Am I feeling productive? Am I feeling I've accomplished something? Am I feeling I'm using my gifts? Am I motivated? Am I allowed freedom to roam and to run? And, every work situation also requires people who like to just work. Some people want to come to work. I want to punch in and do my work and do my job, but this is paying my bills and giving me a chance to do some things. But where I really want to live is when I get home, whether it's see my kids play in sporting events or what have you. There's a work-life balance. And so sometimes we need workers, and they just like to work, but they're not necessarily driven with passion and commitment to the company. And in that case, the more comfortable and enjoyable the workplace is, the better it is for folks like that as well. I mean, I have a client, one of my clients has made an enormous investment in this. And one of the big things for them was their childcare system. I mean, they brought it in-house and they made sure they did it extremely well. And that means people are able to bring their younger children to work. And if something's happening, you can step away from your workstation and head down to the nursery and take care of business. But when they do it, it's not some thoughtless thing. They actually are people who love family as well. So if you took two different organizations and one has a culture where the owners or the leaders are actually family-oriented people, but they're also driven, they'll put their nursery program together because they really, really care about the people and balance and family. Compare that to somebody who just says, we got to put in a nursery. Why? Because our retention rates really suck, and that's what they want.
Looking at the HR numbers and the head count.
You know what? Guess what? The energy in that culture compared to the energy in the other culture is palpably different.
So different.
Yep.
Yeah. If they're just trying to check the box and people can tell, because I came from that. I felt it. I was only in two companies. I did an internship at one oil and gas company and then full time. And I could feel that feeling of like, people want you to have a work-life balance, but secretly it's frowned upon when you leave at 4:30 or 5. When other people are staying till 6 or 7, right? So I had a great excuse. I took the van pool. We had a carpool, and the van left at 4 p.m. So many times.
Perfect.
It was about a 30-minute drive because Houston's pretty big. So we would take this shuttle with 10 or 12 people and drive 30 minutes to, closer to downtown where we all lived. And then my apartment was about half a mile from that spot where we met.
Right.
So I was only putting 1 mile on my car a day. The rest was going on this van. But the funniest part would be when we'd be sitting in a meeting and there's like the VP of supply chain or like a senior leader. And I'd kind of be packing up my things while everyone was intending to stay until 5.
Not cool.
And I'm like, I got to get the van pool. I got to get the van pool.
I got to get the van.
And so I knew it was being
funny.
frowned upon. I was like, man, I'm probably going to get fired eventually or let go because I keep leaving during these meetings. But deep down, I was like, these meetings are kind of pointless. And why are we doing it so late in the day? Why can't these be, first thing in the morning, get a quick start on the day, and then I can focus on what they want me to do. Yeah. And so
there you were asking why again. I have a better idea.
Asking
Nobody's
why
listening. I know. I'll tell you a funny story. You reminded me of when picture this, like, okay, I'm moving my family again. I'm going from my last job to the new job, and I'm not there 3 days. And I'm a sales manager, and there's probably 60 people who work in the place. And the owner is kind of a grizzled old guy. He goes, come here, watch this. So he takes me back to the back where the employees come in, the employee entrance in the parking lot. He stands there, looks at his watch, and as soon as it goes to 8 o'clock, he locks the door.
Ooh.
And then lets people accumulate, and then opens the door, gives him a glaring look and taps his watch and shaming. It was a shaming. And I was like, I said, oh my God, what have I done?
It's one of these places.
What is this place? And then he would do something similar, but now it's at 5 o'clock, walking around with a little notebook, making notes of who's not at their desk. Like, oh man. I hope the 30-year-olds listening to this podcast can appreciate how far we've come.
We've come a long way. But the thing is, in some areas we haven't, because I remember when I was still in my role in 2017, I came in a little late one day that I didn't take the van pool. I strolled in like at 8:05. And my manager at the time, her cube was right there, or she had an office and then 4 cubicles. Those people reported to her so she can kind of check in with them or meet up for team meetings. And I remember she said, oh, good morning. And she looked, I could see her eyes look at the time. I was like, okay, it's 8:05. I'm sorry I wasn't at my desk. And the thing that really was like the straw that broke the camel's back is that I was leaving a little early just to beat the traffic, like 4:30. But we had a meeting that went through my lunch break. And so she made a comment about me leaving early. She ran up to my desk and she's like, oh, like I noticed you came in a little late. You're leaving now? Like you're leaving early. And I was like, you made me meet through my lunch break. Like I had to bring my lunch and we sat through it. And I looked at my coworker like, she's kidding, right? Is this kindergarten? Like, do I have to check out to use the restroom? And it was probably about a month later that I actually put in my 2-week notice because I was like, I just can't do this. I can't do it anymore.
I see a corresponding thing at the other end of the spectrum that I'd be curious if you thought about it. There are also folks who are coming into the workplace who haven't worked. Their process has been pretty cushy from the time they were kids, and they got an allowance and they didn't have to do chores around the house and all that other stuff. And then
no, that's true. I'll
college is paid for, and they go do that, and then
they expect 6 figures out the gate.
5-year. Yeah, I mean, you hear the jokes and the stereotypes, in the marketplace of living in your parents' basement, all that stuff. I was just curious, is that a real thing? Like, and then they come to work entitled, and
I do hear that. And I think that's true to an extent. I know millennials get a bad rap for being the bubble wrap generation. I like to think that I kind of prove that wrong and that I'm willing to roll up my sleeves, work hard. I've done plenty of chores in my lifetime. I've cleaned the house and vacuumed. I remember every weekend my parents had us we had to remove books off the bookshelf and dust them one by one.
Oh, there
like
you
that
go.
at my
There's
household.
good training.
You
That's
know, I
perfect.
had two brothers. One brother got the dishwasher, one took the trash out, one vacuumed the house. And it was very good separation of duties. But now that I'm starting to get to this entrepreneurial phase, I'm like, well, yeah, that's all great, but really I should delegate all those things out because I don't like to do them. They're not really revenue, generating activities for me. And so I'm kind of like pushing back, on my parents' old mentality. I'm like, hey, you guys should have taught us entrepreneurial stuff. Like, hey, how do I make money so I can pay someone to do the lawn instead of me doing the lawn?
Right,
Right.
right. Well, just think about that mindset. That's a shift. That's
That's a total shift.
that's a mindset. Like that's where the culture is going. It's also explains why people are not even vacuum their house anymore. We have these little robot things,
Those are the
just
best. I
turn
need to
on.
get one.
Yeah, and like I don't know if you can see this cartoon that I had when I was a kid growing up called The Jetsons, and it's just this futuristic cartoon of George Jetson and his family living in this world, and it's
I have to
eerily
check that out.
oh my god, it's eerily true. Like they didn't have cars, they had a little spacecraft, and they didn't own that. They just came up and pulled up to the door, and he
And one
steps
of them
on it,
picked
and
him
off
up.
it goes, which is all part of the
Uber, yeah.
and pretty soon it'll be an automated highway system, and they'll
That'll be
just have
awesome.
pods. You'll just order a pod on your phone, and you get in it. You won't. There will be no cars. The future is crazy. It's crazy. I think that the thing is coming up for me that I would say to anybody, no matter what age you are, there's no substitute for what I would call a work ethic. There's an old expression, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And, it's ironic we're talking on the day of an election, but there's no free thing. Things are produced, and there's an exertion of some energy, whether it's a manual labor or investments in a technology. It's all the same thing. We're producing. We're making. It's a work. So there's an ethic involved in working and producing and making things happen. And that can be done in any industry whatsoever, but it's the application. And whether it's your horsepower of the hand or whether it's the brain power of your mind, what we're looking for is people who want to get up early and produce and excel and achieve and make something happen. And for that, you expect some economic return. That's how it works. You just can't wake up and sit and expect things to happen.
Absolutely.
And get delivered to you. It just doesn't work that way. And it never will. It never will. So that's not to say, people don't need help, and they do, and we tend to do a good job of that. And that's as far to the line that I'm going to get on your podcast talking anything political, because it's a crazy world. I'm working a lot right now in my practice as an executive coach, helping people and my leaders, the CEOs I coach and the teams that work for them. How are we handling the negative energy in the system? It is polarizing and divisive and powerfully challenging. And then layer on top of that, of course, the COVID pandemic. And this is the first time I heard somebody say this, that the country faced one of these big crises like the Second World War, when we were attacked and it unified an entire country. And now we're being attacked by a virus and it's polarizing us. It's frightening. And it's polarized us in so many ways. And you ask the question, what the heck is happening to us that we didn't circle the wagons as a national thing that kind of disappeared or eliminated our differences politically, philosophically, and we all kind of gathered around to face it together, right? I don't know. It could be missing. So in the businesses, it's stunning to see the variation of how people are handling it. And what I'm noticing now more than ever before is that people who are sitting at the lead, at the helm of an organization, have got to start gut checking, how deeply do I care about the people as humans, as individuals, as family members who themselves are struggling with the division and the divisiveness and the pandemic. But this is where the companies that genuinely care, because there's a CEO and people who work for the CEO who are rooted and grounded in caring. And if it's not there, times like this create bigger problems than they need to be. Because the number one thing that many of my client leaders are doing is they're stopping and saying, we're going to do whatever it takes to take care of the people and to keep them safe. And as you know, there's confusion about what that looks like.
Yes.
And the ones that seem to be doing the best job are basically having policies that say, you're going to decide for yourself and we're going to support you. And then they'll make a compelling case for keeping the business moving under the circumstances and doing what's best, because the enterprise itself is the one feeding the families. And there are some enterprises that there was no hope. Entire businesses and industries are disappearing. And caring didn't matter.
Right.
I mean, there's tears that are flowing around this country in industries that are just screeching to a halt, and there are others that are managing. But I'm very, very strongly committed in the coming couple of years as I do my work to having people do a check-in with themselves. What is your caring capacity? Where are you? Where are you? Where is your heart as it relates to leading? And is it a leading from a caring heart? I just did a podcast interview that dropped last week. Can we promote the podcast?
Feel free. Shout it out.
Yeah, it's Sheer Clarity, oneword.com. We'll take you to the podcast page. And the guy interviewed, his name is Keith Alper. He has a fleet of marketing agencies, public relations, event planning, advertising. Although it's just an amazing thing that he's got going. And he wrote a book when he had this aha moment about this caring about people. And the title of the book is From Like to Love. From Like to Love. I read it before the podcast interview, and it's pretty foundational about the power that's unleashed when genuine caring for the people is present. And it's one of those things you can't fake it, and the closer you get to, Wall Street, and where every day is another deal that we got to get it closed before something bad in the world happens, it gets less and less prevalent.
Yeah.
We're caring about the transaction, and if you have to work till 4 a.m, so be it.
Right.
Anyway, that's enough of that. You get the idea. So anybody who's forming a business, whether you're going to have 2 employees or 2,000 or 20,000 or 200,000, you as the leader have to check your caring index and make sure you spend sufficient time connecting with, at the heart level, about the people you're asking to do something for you. Let's assume they're independent contractors, as we've taught them to be. They come with a package of goods and skills and competencies and commitments, and that means, great, that's good news. That's all transactional. And oh, by the way, I also love you and care about you.
Right. It's a lot. It's a tall order for sure, because I find myself getting very into the weeds of, caring about people's great, but I don't have time. I have to make this deal work. I need to get this commission.
That's right.
Will carrying pay the bills today? But then there's that other side of me that's like, on my whiteboard, I have it written down where all I want to do, if I wrote down, if I could do this all day, what would I love to do? And it's connecting with people. I mean, whether I'm traveling and staying in, before COVID, hostels, with 11 random strangers sleeping in like bunk beds in Vietnam, I loved learning about, oh, you're from Australia, you're from Toronto, like very cool. I was even in Thailand one time with someone who went to the University of Texas. They're from Texas, where I live. And I'm like, whoa, we're over here on this tiny island in Thailand, and you're from my state. How cool is that, right? And so I've been really intentional lately about connecting, almost where it's too much. Some of my mentors on calls that I get on Friday, we do a book club. Yep. They'll tell me I'm a little too generous. I just give out a 30-minute booking link, not knowing if I'm going to get business from it. I just want to connect. One of the lenders who I know in the real estate industry, she's been doing this for 25 or 30 years. And she was like, Chris, I think you need to probably cut it down to a 15-minute because you're being too generous with your time. But I told her that's where I get my energy, and whether or not it turns into business, I'm learning something, right? From our call here. I'm taking great notes down. I mean, people buy into the mission and making impact. We're independent contractors. I'm getting so many nuggets from this. Now, whether we do business or not, ever, or whether I get you some clients from my audience or vice versa, I think this is just so incredible to connect. And,
absolutely.
And I've been really focusing on that lately because, like you said, we need to move from like to love. How do we balance that? Caring for people while treating them as independent contractors, knowing that at any moment they can leave or we may have to let them go as priorities shift for the business, right? Yeah, it's a lot to juggle for sure.
Well, I'm doing something similar at this stage of my career as well. And, I've always done the majority of my coaching work on via Skype or Zoom. So this was not a big transition for me.
Right.
And my clients are all over the place. And so I was always using this. But the other part of my work has been as a facilitator for the Young Presidents Organization and their small groups. They call them forums. And it's 8 to 10 CEOs who live near each other and have no competing interests, where they can gather once a month for 4 hours to really become a very intimate, vulnerable, and open, trusting advisory board to each other. And of course, now they're all operating virtually. And it's very, I decided when people ask me if there's a difference, I say I wouldn't even put them in the same category. They don't belong. You can't even. They're not comparable.
They're not the same.
Sitting in a room with a circle full of people in the energy and the space, to ask whether that's better than a Zoom call is self-evident. But don't even bother comparing them. Let's compare Zoom calls. Was that a great Zoom call? Was that a crappy Zoom call? What do you do to have the best Zoom call that you can possibly have? And the further you get towards the need for intimacy and vulnerability and openness, the little harder it gets to do in the Zoom world. Can you do it? Yes, you can. But is it ever going to match or come close to what was happening if you were sitting together? Never. So let's just bifurcate them, leave them in their own pods.
They're different categories.
Yeah, I have an apple and an orange. Which one is sweeter? What are you talking about?
They're both great. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the end, people are learning to adjust. And
absolutely,
I can't tell you how many times I've sort of tried to type up the fullest list of what you should do to have a Zoom call be the most intimate, making sure you're in a private room, that you're at a large screen versus a phone. Like some Zoom calls you can do in your car on the way to work, but some you should never do that way, right?
Right. Because then you're not really paying attention. One thing I've loved about Zoom calls is that you can actually connect. I can see your facial expressions, your gestures. I can see your environment, versus a phone call where you're walking, you're talking. And some people, whenever they do call in on Zoom and they're driving, you can tell they're distracted because they're focusing on the road and they'll occasionally glance over. So it's not quite the same. You don't have the undivided attention as you would in person people can tell it's rude to text in front of you because we're talking for the most part. Sometimes millennials and stuff, we do it. You know, I've been very intentional about leaving my phone face down, so I'm not tempted to pick it up and be disrespectful during a conversation. But
you know, it's funny finding now, and I'm hearing about it. It's called Zoom fatigue. There are people who are forgetting. You know what? Did we have to have a Zoom call when we could have just picked up the phone and had a discussion? So
I get it.
I make darn sure. Well, I ask myself the question: can I just pick up the phone? Yes. I actually know what they look like. I can actually see their picture if I go onto LinkedIn or Facebook.
Do I have to see them talking head?
Like, Jesus, right? And you know how long it takes us to get ready to go out for the day?
Yeah, that's true. And I guess it's a little easier for men at times because I know a lot of women are like, well, I got to put on makeup and get ready and look presentable.
Oh, God, yeah.
I kind of roll out of bed. I'm just like, okay, I can do a Zoom call, you know, comb the hair to the side a little bit.
Right. So I had a question for you. When you look back at your podcast experience, do you have a sense of what your most popular episodes were, or what made one episode jump out as an all-star episode versus, it was okay?
Yeah, so I've been digging into the statistics a little bit more. I have a dashboard in the podcast hosting platform that I use called Libsyn, I think it stands for Liberated Syndication. Yep. The Libsyn.com gives you some insight into the number of downloads per episode, your overall downloads. And that's actually how I found the free guide that I give away as my freebie, because my most downloaded episode was my 5 productivity hacks that I recommend. So I'm wondering, as people started to find that interesting, it got more downloads, and that shows up as one of the top recommended ones when people find my show. And so that kind of gave me the idea, hey, I should create that as my freebie. Another great way that I think I tapped into growing my audience, I kind of borrowed from some of the, I guess, the larger shows. I did a whole series of my thoughts of podcasts that I liked, such as How I Built This and Built to Sell and MFCEO Project with Andy Frisella. So whenever people typed in those podcasts, my podcast would pop up because I had done an episode titled that of my thoughts.
Right.
And so people really resonated with, let me see what Chris thinks about, well, first, who is Chris and what did he think about the show before I listened to that show? And then it kind of evolved from there, where I really prefer these conversations. I'm learning a lot versus creating 30 minutes of solo content. Sometimes it takes a little more brain power and preparation than just riffing, like you said.
Yeah, well, I'm doing the same thing. I mean, I got 35 episodes out of sheer clarity, and I covered 30 years in 30 episodes. It was actually kind of like depressing. I went, wait a minute, I have 30 years, and I like, that's 30 hours. Big deal.
Yeah, how do you sift it down, a lifetime of experience into a couple of episodes?
Yeah. But net effect, though, it's turned out to be a wonderful library. I actually have a client that is using 10 of the episodes and making those episodes part of their online university.
That's awesome.
And they sent a video guy out for me to do a little 3 to 5 minute intro, so that when people log on, the way it works is they'll go to the leadership track. There's these 10 episodes. We're going to work on honesty on this particular. I give them a 3 or 5 minute summary. Then they listen to the podcast for 25 minutes. And then they're going to go and have a Zoom call the following week with people talking about. And the question they'll ask is, what is the one thing that came out of that podcast that we need to pay attention to?
Right.
And it drives incredible conversation. But now I have this idea, maybe I should figure out a way to do that in a marketing sort of way, because it's so much there. But the point of the story was, in the end, after 35, that's it. So now I got to go find some far more interesting people than hearing me talk the whole time. So,
yeah, I actually just passed episode 200 the other day. So,
congratulations!
Thank you. I've been upping it. I've been doing 2 a week now. I started with 1 a week, and I'm just so hungry to talk to as many successful people. And the beauty of it is, with the platform that you and I have started to create, is that if I find someone interesting, I just did this morning. I was like, oh, that guy's interesting. He's the CEO of like such and such sleep health clinic. He's got some cool photos with some fancy houses and cars. You know, he clearly has some of that definition of success,
Right.
at least the Instagram success. And I sent him a direct message on Instagram. Hey, I saw your comment on such and such's post. I'm interested in connecting. If you'd love to share your story with my audience, I mean, I'd love to have you on my show. Would you be interested in connecting? And I got a reply back from his assistant who's checking the page, and we're going to be scheduling something because I'm like, hey, that's an interesting person. I want to learn his story. I want to see what nuggets I can not necessarily just extract. I don't want to just take, but I just am curious. I think we talked about that last time, just having that curiosity, absolutely. Right?
In the end, the thing that's really clear to me more than ever, the piece that I have in the back of my mind when I'm coaching is we are very distractible people.
Yes, we are.
And we have the same hunger that our ancestors did. We want to feel recognized. We want to feel powerful. We want to feel we've achieved something. And having done this for so long, it's turned me around and further deepened my orientation to God and faith, because there is a hole that we're trying to fill, and it's not getting filled by the stuff. And it takes a long time to wake up to that. And on my podcast interviews, I always ask a question at the end. And it's, what would you tell your 23 or 24-year-old self from where you are today at 50 or 60? And almost invariably, people will say something like, slow down, take a breath, smell the roses, be present, and stuff, money, cars, houses, whatever, just won't make you happy. It's about love and connection. And then when you get love and connection in the place, to use your attraction to connection, it's also human. And by human, I mean we will disappoint each other. Eventually, there's no human who's going to be the perfect love machine, and eventually one of us is going to let the other one down, and we might do it routinely. And that's what's gotten me reunited with my idea of faith. I have a Christian ethic, a Christian worldview. And so after spending enough time diving into Christian apologetics, I decided I'm thrown in with Jesus. He's probably exactly who he said he was. After you read and think and evaluate, and I used to spend hours on YouTube listening to the atheist, and I listen to the Christian apologist, and I listen to the atheist. And there's some really just great conversations out there. But when you watch this guy, Ravi Zacharias, stand in front of an auditorium filled with 500 students at a university, and somebody walking up to a microphone and goes, well, if God is so good and so loving, why is there so much pain and suffering? And like, whoa, that's a pretty good question.
That's a pretty good question. That's the one that I would always think about too.
And to watch Ravi handle it, there is an answer, but it's kind of complicated. And we live in a world where we just want the headline.
Black and white answers. Right.
Well, okay. Yeah. If I give you the headline about Jesus, you'll go running down the road going, get away. It's a preacher. He's coming at me. You know, like.
Well, I like what you said there about how you spent a lot of time listening to different points of view, because there's a lesson there. What kind of bugs me a little bit, because I mean, I went to Catholic school my whole life. I went to a Jesuit high school. I studied theology and things like that. Whenever someone of a certain religion, they get so diehard protective about it and they don't want to hear anyone else's point of view, that's what kind of rubs me the wrong way a little bit, because I love to be open, like, oh, why do you believe that? I mean, if you've traveled a lot and you've seen different cultures, and you might see the different gods and whatnot in India or Indonesia, and I'm very interested to hear the story. Like, what does that God represent, and what do you believe about, your God? We all have a different idea of like a God or a greater power of some sort. But I always find it interesting to meet other people that are open-minded to listen to different sides.
Well, you have to be. I mean, not everybody's going to approach it the same way, but in the end, for my sake, it had to appeal to my intellect. And
Yes.
one of the classic books that I'd recommend to anybody who's curious and wants to stay away from anything that's churchy or religious, because that's what really turns people off, is religiosity and church.
Well, even just sales, right? I mean, no one likes to be sold or preached to, or so I think it's kind of similar.
But if you picked up a book called Mere Christianity, and the author's famous, C.S. Lewis, and what he does in that book is he strips away all of the non-essential things and gets into what that fundamentally means. Like, is there in fact a real person who was God and lived and died and came back from the dead? Like, are you kidding me? That's outrageous. Like, okay, so this is a guy who was an Oxford educated atheist. He arrived through logic and reason, writes this beautiful little book about it, and it grabbed me by the back of the neck and just said, dude, you can't ignore this. So it really just is about being curious. I always correlated back to my work. To come to a certain point, I can help leaders with coaching. I can get them tuned in to their emotional intelligence. We spend a lot of time on the bottom of the pyramid that they call it self-awareness. I argue, especially if your audience is a younger audience, if you are not spending time every day and shutting off and unplugging from your highly connected world and being still and quiet to allow your thoughts to rise into your head and to reflect, to hear yourself think, you are going to be severely hampered in your life. Because without some degree of self-awareness, you have no way of effectively managing your emotional stuff. It just shows up and comes out. And you don't know why. And usually it's wreaking havoc. It's screwing up your relationships. It's making you pissed and angry all the time. And if you don't have a handle on it, then you're dead in the water. And I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how much talent you have. If you can't handle conflict, relationships, disappointments, right? Only way I know for you to get that is to have quiet time by yourself. And when you have that time, there's a sense of both aloneness and something else, like something else beyond me. So there's a transcendent quality to it, and it just happens, that the Bible explanation of this whole cosmic thing works if you spend enough time with it. But you can't launch into that day one with anybody. You just have to wait. So I can help them with like really good skills and really good self-reflection exercises. I make them plot out their lifelines, the highs and the lows. I give them a list of 20 really powerful questions. I make them reflect and think and evaluate and analyze. But eventually, I always tell them, I can get you to a certain point, and then that's the limit of a secular, humanistic approach to your psychology. Now the question is there something else, a la a spiritual? Do you sense it? Do you wonder? Have you thought about it? And there's even passages in the Bible that talk about people going into creation and seeing the way it looks and being. You ever hear that phrase, awestruck? Like takes your breath away.
Right.
You go, what?
No, I know earlier you said stop and smell the roses.
Yeah, maybe it's the Grand Canyon. Like until you actually go and stand on the rim of the Grand Canyon and just gaze for 2 hours, you don't have, you're missing something, right?
Right.
And you can do exactly the same thing by looking at the petals on a single flower. It's amazing. So there's amazement out there. There's wonder out there. And, at some point you have to go, okay, so Darwin says this is selection. Really? That kind of beauty? I don't know.
That really stood out when you said that, because I just walked my dog right before our conversation, and I've been leaving my phone here more often, where I'm forced to
Yes.
stop and smell the roses. And there was a flower that caught my eye. It was this really cool purple flower. I'm not sure what kind it was. And I was like, that's a really pretty flower. Like, I stopped there as my dog was sniffing the bush, probably that a dog peed on. I stopped there and I looked at the roses, and I was in admiration a little bit, or not roses, but the purple flowers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because so often I'm just be listening to a podcast or kind of scrolling through Facebook as I'm walking my dog and not paying attention to any of those things.
Bingo.
So being present.
So noticing those things only happens when you aren't doing. And by the way, they don't call us human doings. We're human beings.
Love that. Writing that down. Human beings.
Unfortunately, we've got the wrong end of the stick because we are so busy doing. Nike, remember the Nike phrase, just do it?
Yep.
It stuck around for 20 years. It's still
going around.
It's still there. Just do it.
It's on my vision board too, so I'm guilty. I love that.
Oh,
Take action. Go.
Yeah, like, okay, somebody's got to grab folks by the neck and say, no, be still. There's actually a scripture. I'm not that good at Bible verses and scriptures, so I'll torches. I think it's a psalm, and it's just be still and know I am God. Like, I'm an AA guy. I've been 12 years sober, and I can tell you the people who come into that room, nobody came in there at the end of a winning streak. Trust me.
Definitely not.
And the thing that happens in those rooms is the confrontation with your powerlessness and the willingness to admit that. And then the very second step is can you come to believe that a power greater than yourself? And they'll use the phrase higher power, but the original movement was based on a biblical context of God. But to make it available to the wider range, they just said higher power. The concept is, until you've at least surrendered to something larger than yourself, your little self-humanistic moral relativism is never going to get you where you want to be. Because everybody wants something called peace, and everybody wants to feel satisfied. But surrender is a huge part of that. And I see it in leaders. Until leaders have a grounding in some sense of humility about how inefficient and ineffective they really are as humans, they end up just reading their own press clippings and believing in it, and boy, oh boy. So I guess I'm feeling this idea of, I'm hanging out with a couple of the guys that I know who are in their 30-somethings. We have these conversations all the time because I love them. Keeps me young, and helps me understand what's coming next. And you're in that crowd for me. You're one of those guys. And so the sooner I can sort of get guys saying, dude, you have got to get less doing and more being, and you've got to get some sense of the beyondness, and call it God or however you want for now. Get yourself connected with what's outside of you and inside of you at the same time.
I love that. My tagline, my motto for the podcast is actually less dreaming, more doing, about taking action. But today it's going to be less doing, more being, because I really love what you said. I mean, sometimes you're, high performers, we're on to the next thing. We achieve a goal. We don't even take time to celebrate it because we're like, what's next? Where's that next mountain to climb? But whenever you stop and smell the roses and you just appreciate where you are, what you have, who's in your life. I mean, we already have everything we need, most of us. I mean, we've got food, shelter, water, many of us. I mean, some do not. Of course, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, obviously we want more, but we know, or at least we need to know, a bigger car, a bigger, nicer house, that's not going to be the thing that scratches that itch ultimately, right? We're going to want something else eventually. And so we've got to just stop and appreciate the present moment, what we have. And it's a good reminder, I think, the message that you shared today, to just slow down a little bit and be appreciative.
Actually slow down to go faster.
Absolutely.
Anybody out there who hasn't seen it, I recommend the movie Ford versus Ferrari.
I love that. I saw it recently too.
Okay. I mean, the metaphors there are fantastic. It's about a driver who knows the car, his life, he's the car, but he's got these maintenance people who think they know the car, and they're giving him advice about what to do, and he's violating the advice. Then there's the big Ford guys who they've got skin in the game with their investment. So there's this whole thing. But in the end, what you'll find him is in the car is knowing how long can I go at red line? Because here's the deal. If you are off by 0.001 second, you'll blow your engine, and then you have categorically lost the race. So if you don't stop at the right time for tires and brakes or to gas up, you run out of gas. And the guy in the car is going, do I have enough? Do I have to pull over? Should I keep going? That's the metaphor. It's like,
I love it.
Dude, there is smoke coming out of the engine, and the E gate, the thing's on E, and the guy's going, no, but I know there's at least a tenth of a gallon. I know I only have another half a mile. I know, okay. If you want to put all of it on that, be my guest.
Otherwise, stop and do those required maintenances along the way.
Over, and I do this a lot with clients. A lot of businesses, they're upset, they're bothered, they're in through change, they're going through issues, they're going through challenges, and their idea of how to handle this is put the pedal further to the metal. And I'm going, no, time out. Well, we don't have time. We don't have time to have a timeout. There you have it.
You never have time, right? You'll never have time if you don't make it. But I want to respect your time. I know we went a little over. I don't know.
No worries.
But I always enjoy our conversation. So I was like, hey, if you want to keep going a little further, I'm totally happy. I have no other appointments after this. But with that being said, do you have any last takeaways you want to share? Maybe one takeaway that our audience can apply today to transform their life?
Yeah, I would say you must put margin time in your calendar that has nothing on it. It is not doing time.
I love
Whether
that.
you make that early in the morning or in the afternoon or in the evening. And by that, I mean nothing.
No technology.
Zero. There's a story about Carl Jung talked about with a client, and the client was this enormously wealthy, affluent, and super powerful business person. And his assignment, the guy was losing his mind, right? He was losing his mind. And Jung's assignment was, I want you to go home this week and every night spend an evening alone for an hour to 2 hours. Okay. Guy comes back a week later and he's pissed off because nothing worked. The guy wanted results in a week. He goes, I did it exactly like you said. Every night I sat down for an hour to an hour and a half. One night I listened to Mozart. Another night I listened to Chopin. Another night I listened to Beethoven. Another night, I looked at Renoir paintings and I just sat in my study. And Jung goes, you missed the assignment. I told you to be alone, not with Mozart, not with Beethoven, alone.
With yourself.
So that's how I would leave it. And I would say try it in small doses, because if you're not used to it and you have your device attached to you, you might want to try 10 or 15 minutes at a crack. Turn that bad boy so off, period, nothing. Off.
Completely off. Just
not a buzz.
Pretend your teacher before a test is telling you turn those phones off.
Turn it off and
completely.
And be still and wait to see what comes up. Breathing is good advice. Too. All
Breathing helps. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I really appreciate your time. And where can our audience go to learn more about you? Is sheerclarity.com the best place?
Yeah, that'll
Check out
get
your
you to
podcast.
that'll get you to my website page with the podcast. But I'm on my website is jkevinmchugh, one word, .com. So it's jkevinmchugh.com.
Awesome.
And that's where you'll find a whole bunch of stuff.
I will link that up in the show notes, and as soon as the
Appreciate it.
episode is live, I will share all the links with you as well.
Yeah, well, you and I,
like
after we hang up here, we're going to look at the calendar, and we're going to do a reverse pivot and get you on the Sheer Clarity show, and have you let people know what you're all about.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Kevin, and I appreciate your time once again.
Okay, bud. Take care.
You too.